He stood alone, glass in hand, the quiet pressing closer than ever. Every year, the same routine, the drink, the stillness, the waiting. He didn't know why he kept doing it, only that he couldn't stop. The hours slipped by in silence. No calls. No company. No reason to stay awake except the ache that kept him standing there. His reflection stared back at him, sharp, hollow, unchanging. He tried to remember what it felt like to want something, to expect someone. But nothing came. Not a sound, not a memory strong enough to hold on to. Just the familiar emptiness that never seemed to leave. He whispered to himself, not even sure he'd spoken aloud, "I do not know who I am waiting for, maybe even a miracle in the snow." And still, he stayed there, because even a man who's lost everything can't help hoping that one night, something, or someone, might finally knock back. 3 soft knocks cut through the quiet, and his heart stopped. He turned toward the sound, unsure if he'd imagined it. No one ever came here. Not a soul. The silence had always been his only visitor. But the knock came again, gentle, certain, alive. He walked slowly to the door, his hand heavy on the handle. When it opened, 2 faces looked up at him, a woman with tired eyes that still carried light, and a little girl clutching a red box against her chest. The child smiled, shy but brave. "We brought cookies," she said. "We're giving them to our new neighbors." For a moment, he couldn't speak. The words didn't fit this house, this life. Yet something in her voice reached past the walls he'd built. He nodded once, quiet and unsure, and stepped aside. "Would you like to come in?" he asked. The woman hesitated, studying him for a breath, then smiled. "If you're sure." He was. At least, he wanted to be. As they crossed the threshold, something inside him shifted, small, fragile, but real, as if the silence had finally been broken from the inside. He watched them move through the room as if they belonged there. Leia opened the box, and Poppy's small hands offered him a cookie with the kind of trust he hadn't felt in years. He accepted it without knowing why. The sound of their laughter broke the rhythm of the clock that had ruled his nights. Every word they spoke filled the air with something that almost felt alive again. Poppy climbed onto a chair, eyes bright, studying the bare tree in the corner. "Why doesn't it have anything?" she asked. He started to answer, but before he could, she untied the pink ribbon from her hair and looped it over a branch. Then she reached into her pocket, pulling out a handful of candies and hanging them one by one, her little fingers trembling with excitement. She stepped back, proud and certain. "Now it has friends," she said. He stared at the tree, then at her. A smile rose before he could stop it, quiet, unfamiliar, real. The kind that didn't come from habit or politeness, but from something stirring deep inside. Maybe the miracle he'd been waiting for wasn't someone at his door. Maybe it was the moment his heart remembered how to feel again. He walked them to the door, unsure of what to say. Leia thanked him, her voice quiet but sincere. Poppy waved, her mittened hand clutching the empty cookie box. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Graham," she said before running into the snow. He stood there, watching them fade into the white until there was nothing left but silence. When he turned back, the house was still, but not the same. On the tree, her pink ribbon fluttered faintly, catching the faintest breath of air. He stepped closer and stared at it for a long time, the smallest piece of color in a room that had forgotten what color was. Days passed. The house returned to order, yet something refused to settle. His eyes kept drifting to the tree, to that single ribbon that didn't belong and yet felt right. The silence no longer pressed against him, it waited. For what, he didn't know. But for the first time, he wanted to find out. He told himself it was coincidence when he walked into the bakery. Just coffee, nothing more. But when Leia looked up and smiled in surprise, something in him eased. Behind the counter, Poppy sat with crayons scattered across a napkin. Her face lit up the moment she saw him. "Mr. G," she called, as if she'd known him forever. The nickname stuck before he could object. He ordered coffee, then stayed longer than he meant to, listening to Leia laugh as she told a story about a customer who'd mistaken salt for sugar. Her laughter came easily, the kind that made silence step back. She spoke of her dream to start a cookie stall at the winter market, then brushed it off with a sigh. It's nothing serious. Just an idea. He didn't argue. He just listened, quietly taking in the way her voice softened when she talked about hope. That night, he opened his laptop, drafted an email, and sent a grant application through his company's outreach program. No name attached. No signature. When she received it days later, her eyes shone in quiet disbelief. She never asked. He never said a word. But every time their paths crossed after that, something unspoken lingered, a small, steady spark neither of them dared to name. He called it dinner, though his voice carried hesitation when he asked. If you're free, maybe you and Poppy would like to come over. Leia's brow lifted. Are you cooking? He smiled, unsure. Attempting to. When they arrived, the air was different, soft, alive, touched with the scent of cinnamon. The table was set, unevenly, 3 plates waiting side by side. In the kitchen, he wiped his hands nervously on a towel. Leia followed the smell, then stopped short. On the counter sat a tray of small French apple tartlets. She froze, her voice barely above a whisper. My mother used to make these when I was little. He nodded once, eyes lowered. You said they were your favorite. I thought I'd give it a try. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't planned, it wasn't romantic. It was gratitude that trembled through every breath. He didn't move at first, then slowly returned the gesture, steady, careful, human. Behind them, Poppy hummed softly to herself, drumming her fingers on the table and turning her song into laughter. They sat down together, sharing food and quiet glances, the kind that needed no words. For the first time in years, he felt what it meant to sit with others and not feel empty. The meal was simple, but the feeling, it was everything. Still, as the laughter faded and the night grew long, a thought lingered in the back of his mind. Can a heart rebuilt from grief survive when the past finally knocks again? The dishes were done, the lights dimmed low. Poppy had fallen asleep on the rug, her small hand still clutching a crayon. Leia tucked a blanket around her, then looked toward Graham. He sat quietly, turning a mug between his hands, the steam rising and fading like thoughts he couldn't say aloud. She adores you, Leia said softly. He smiled, faintly. I adore her too. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was honest, heavy with everything they hadn't yet shared. After a long pause, he spoke. I always thought I'd be a father. His voice barely carried the words. My wife was 6 months pregnant when she died. He didn't look up. Car accident. It was snowing that night. I was supposed to meet her for dinner. She was late. I was annoyed. Then came the call. Leia said nothing. She only listened, her hand tightening around the edge of the couch. They didn't save the baby, he went on quietly. A boy. We just picked his name. He drew in a shaky breath. After that, I worked. That's all I did. Tried to adopt later, but they said I wasn't suitable. Too isolated. Too unstable. A bitter laugh escaped him. They weren't wrong. Leia crossed the room and sat across from him. That's not who you are now, she said. He met her eyes. Maybe not anymore. Her gaze fell. Poppy's father left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready. I haven't seen him since. He didn't interrupt. It was hard, she whispered. Not just raising her, people judged me. They thought I'd ruined my life. You didn't ruin your life, he said quietly. Not even close. Their eyes met again, steady and unguarded. Two people who had lost differently but deeply. In that quiet moment, something passed between them, not love, not yet, but recognition. Two broken hearts, finally seeing themselves reflected in another's silence. When the door closed behind them, the house went still again. Only the sound of the clock remained. He sat for a moment, staring at the empty space they'd left behind, the folded blanket, the faint scent of cinnamon, the warmth already fading from the room. Then his eyes caught it. The cookie box. The same red one from that first night. It sat quietly on the table, untouched, out of place but impossible to ignore. He reached for it slowly, his hands trembling as his fingers brushed the worn cardboard. He turned it over, studying the little creases where Poppy's small hands had held it. Something inside him cracked open. All at once, the weight of years pressed down on him, the wife he'd lost, the child he never met, the loneliness he'd worn like armor. He pressed the box to his chest and bowed his head. The tears came without warning, soft at first, then unstoppable. His shoulders shook as the silence filled with sound for the first time in years. He cried for what had been taken, for what he had buried, and for the fragile hope that had somehow found its way back to his door. Maybe life was offering him one more try. The knock came again, but this time it wasn't at Graham's door. It was hers. Leah opened it, and the sound of his name caught in her throat before she could speak. Daniel Reeves stood there, older but unchanged in all the ways that still hurt. A bag rested at his feet, his voice calm, practiced. "Leah, we need to talk." He said he wanted to see his daughter. Said he was ready now. But the words felt wrong, too smooth, too late. By the end of the week, a letter arrived, official paper, heavy with threat. Custody. Partial rights. His signature stamped at the bottom. Leah sat on the floor with the letter trembling in her hands. She couldn't afford a lawyer. Couldn't even think straight. The old fear crept in, the one that whispered she'd never be enough, that people like Daniel always win. When Graham came that evening, he found her sitting still, eyes red, voice barely above a whisper as she told him everything. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, she looked down, ashamed. "I don't want to take advantage of you. This isn't your responsibility." He stepped closer. "Leah," he said softly, "you never asked me for anything. I'm not doing this because you begged me, or because I feel obligated." He waited until she looked up. "I'm doing this because you and Poppy deserve someone to stand beside you. You don't have to carry this alone." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Just a trembling breath that turned into a nod. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew the truth: love born from loss was about to face its hardest test. Will it survive when the law, and the past, come to reclaim it? He didn't ask for permission. Within days, the best family attorney in the state had taken Leah's case, paid for quietly, no explanation needed. She protested, but he only said, "Let me do what I can." "This one's for Mr. G," she declared proudly, holding up a blob of dough that almost looked like a tree. "But he always eats mine anyway." Graham stepped into the room just as Leah laughed from the counter. "Because yours are always the best," he said, brushing snow from his coat and hanging it up before kneeling beside Poppy. She grinned, handing him the cookie like a prize. He looked around the room, ribbons, toys, paper cutouts scattered across the floor, and felt something shift inside him again, not sharp like grief, but deep and warm. This was the same house where silence once echoed against empty walls. Now, every corner carried their voices. Leah handed him a mug of cider, smiling as she wiped a streak of flour from his shoulder. "Welcome home," she said softly. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, at Poppy spinning near the table, at the light that filled spaces that once felt unreachable. And as their laughter rose again, he realized, every sound, every smile, was proof of how far a single knock could travel. ChatGPT said. The papers were signed quietly, without ceremony. No speeches, no applause, just the final sound of a pen against paper. The judge smiled, and it was done. Graham Elridge was now, in every way that mattered, Poppy's father. They didn't make an announcement. They didn't need to. The whole town already knew, the way he walked her to school, the way Leia saved him the last pastry each morning, the way the three of them laughed like they'd been doing it forever. That evening, the house was alive with their small traditions. The tree stood glowing, layered with the same mix of ornaments and candy Poppy had hung a year ago. And near the top, the pink ribbon still fluttered, soft, unchanged, and still the first thing anyone ever left behind. Graham stepped to the door, his hand resting on the handle. He opened it just enough to feel the rush of cold air brush against his face. Leia turned from the kitchen, smiling. "Where are you going?" He looked back at her. "Just checking," he said. "For what?" she asked. He glanced toward the quiet street outside, then back at her and Poppy, their laughter spilling through the light behind him. "Just wanted to see what it feels like when the doors open." She crossed the room, touched his arm, her voice low. "It feels like home." He smiled, leaving the door open a moment longer, letting the warmth reach the world beyond the threshold. When love finally walks through the open door, can the heart ever close it again?